I'm Kyle Malnati, your host of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. At Calibrate, we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. My personal mission is to encourage, empower, and educate you by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. Our esteemed guest today just published a book. Super excited for him. Doors Open When You Knock. I am sitting down with author Stephen Ross. Stephen is actually here in the Mile High City with me in Colorado. We've actually had conversations long before this podcast episode about how to get listings, how to be relevant in the real estate industry, how to create your own opportunities. And once he published his book, I said, gosh, we got to get together on the podcast. And frankly, he contacted me and said, hey, what does it take to get on the podcast? I was like, great idea. Let's do it. Stephen, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be here.
It's going to be a fun conversation. We're going to dive right into it. You have self-described yourself as an introvert, someone who doesn't work nights or weekends. You can't be found online. Well, maybe now with the book you can be. You don't do parties or events. You're pretty much antisocial, which is kind of rare for a real estate agent. And the way we got connected is you listed a home in my neighborhood, Homestead, which a lot of people know that that's a neighborhood that we work in quite a bit. And you had shared with me as we were talking about the market, as we were comparing ideas in a different market a year ago that was not nearly as hot as it is today. What does it take to get this house sold? Where are we on pricing? But the really interesting thing that I found about our discussion is that you got that listing, like the majority of your listings, by door knocking. And this is something that most real estate agents that especially work a sphere of influence absolutely run for the hills when they hear this concept. And so I've got to know, first of all, whatever possessed you to door knock, to quite literally cold call in person, and how have you made that effective, Stephen? I know you've written a whole book about it, but just in short, how have you made that effective?
Well, you're right. We could just spend the next 40 minutes answering that question, but I will be as succinct as possible and relevant. And that is, when I got into real estate in 2005, I had 3 kids to feed. I got my license March 15th, 2005. My third child was born a month later. So there was 3 hungry mouths. And I was now in a commission-only business. And in LA, which is where I lived and where I was born and raised, I knew lots of people, but I was with Coldwell Banker. Corporate Coldwell Banker had this 2-week training called Fast Start. Somewhere towards the end of that Fast Start, they brought in this real estate coach who was this ex-NFL football player and pretty gruff, mean-looking guy. He said, it's a real simple business. You just knock on heads, knock on doors, pick one. And I thought, to heck with you, dude. I'm a UCLA grad. I've worked on Wall Street. I've done a startup. I am not knocking on doors. That's just no way. Of course, 3 months later, I was out of people to talk to, and I thought I'd better try this knocking on doors thing. So the reality is I had no interest in knocking on doors, but I did have an interest in feeding my family and not going back to what I was doing, which was IT and consulting and, a bunch of stuff that just wasn't what I wanted to do. So the why was big enough to get me to do something that I had to do, right? Because as you just described, I'm none of the things that the, using air quotes, typical realtor does. I don't do parties. I don't want to work nights. I don't want to do open house. I don't want to do any of that. But I still have to connect people and property. And so the doors just seemed like the simplest thing to do.
I think of a personal experience of my own, Stephen, where I got into the real estate brokerage business as a young 20s something, fresh out of college with a degree in finance, very similar backgrounds to you. Now, I never worked on Wall Street, never worked in financial services, but real estate has a lot of financial aspects to it. So I'm working on a brokerage team. The one thing that I would say that was smart enough at that point in my life is I knew that I didn't have enough experience to legitimately sell a client on the idea of listing a property with me. Because I was young, I never owned a property myself. I certainly didn't own some of the apartment buildings that they owned. And I said, I'm going to work on a team. I'm going to learn as much as I can and sort of get positional experience through my team. And after that, I said, I'm going to make cold calls, because at least if someone says, to heck with you, It's not like my best friend that says to heck with you. It's, someone that I don't really know. And it's not to say I don't care about them, but it didn't sting as bad. And so I've got to imagine that for someone like yourself that relocated from LA to Colorado, that this is probably a great strategy for someone that's starting in a new market, whether they're experienced already or they're just starting in real estate for the first time, right?
Well, that's true. I mean, in LA, I did know people and I still knocked on doors, and I came here and I knew no people. So I really had I really had to knock on doors because I didn't know anyone and I didn't know the market. So I mean, that is, again, this isn't really about door knocking per se. It's not what the book is about. But if for the realtors that are listening, there is an advantage to knocking on doors. You just learn the market so much faster, and you know things if you're paying attention that the average right here, you work Homestead. I can go, I haven't walked Homestead in 12 years, 10 years, whatever it's been. I can go walk it for 3 days and know it just as good as you, essentially. And it's your home market because I know what questions to ask and things like that. So there are some side benefits, to knocking on doors as a real estate agent.
Absolutely. And I would think that most people listening to this podcast, most of our Calibrate Calvins that are out there or our Calibrate Callies are thinking that this is sort of like real estate jail. It's penance, it's purgatory to when they've made it, they don't have to do this anymore. But I want to encourage that you continue to door knock, even though you've been in this business here in, for 15, 16 years now.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be honest. The last 12 months, I've knocked on doors just for a few weeks, right, due to the pandemic, and my business is altering. Right, I have a book. I do speaking and training. I do some other things besides just real estate. And at some point, right, I have to decide where am I going to spend my time. If I was only selling real estate, I'd still be knocking on doors. And the reason is, it goes back to what you said before. Why was I knocking on doors when most people are doing, sphere of influence and things like that? Because really what's happened at the doors is I created my sphere at the doors, right? So I walk down a block, let's say there's 20 homes on it or 24 homes on it. And I know 20% of those people pretty well. So I know 8 of them, maybe something like that, 6 to 8 of them. And probably 2 or 3 of them on average are people who know, like, and trust me. It doesn't mean they'll for sure use me when they go to sell their home, but oftentimes they'll call me. I might be one of the agents they're interviewing. And therefore, a lot of what the last several years has been is just checking in on people, right? So if there's any people that do ninja selling, right? Ninja selling, what does Larry talk about? Being in flow with people. How am I in flow with them? I show up at their door 2 or 3 times a year. What's better than that? Here we are. Hey, Kyle, how's it going? Right? You catch up, you're there for 1 to 5 minutes and you're gone. If they're not there, I left them a note. It felt like I was there. It felt like we connected. So it really did evolve over time. I was never very good. Not that I've never done it. I've obviously gotten clients right there at the door, but the bulk of it was relationship building.
That's great points, that just because you're talking to someone that you may not know for the first time doesn't mean that all the steps are still not necessary. And I think, frankly, those of us that prospect people that are not in our sphere are far more intentional because you treat it very seriously. And I'm not saying that people that work a sphere of influence don't treat it seriously, but sometimes I think there's a tendency, maybe, Stephen, if you'll go with me here, to sort of assume that your best friend should work with you because you guys are friends. And the reality is, every person, and Larry Kendall of Ninja Selling and others will quote that, the average person knows 12, 13, 14 real estate agents. So you're not sticking out. And when people get frustrated that they don't get hired by their friends and family, it's because they aren't treating it intentionally. So for those that are maybe working a sphere that have never done door knocking or cold calling, what are some of the tactical steps that you do as you approach that door? Quite literally, from getting out of your car, or frankly, actually before you even get in your car, of how you're kind of mapping out this process. Because I think intentionality is one of the missing ingredients that a lot of realtors look at and they say, well, why am I not being successful? And it's like, part of it's the preparation.
How I approach the door is not super relevant unless people are going to go knock on doors. And by the way, if you're thinking of knocking on doors, it's a 1-year commitment. If you're going to do it for 3 weeks, save your time. It's not going to make any difference, other than give you a little courage boost for a few weeks. But I think what's more relevant is for people who are already doing stuff you don't feel like doing. Most of us do not feel like sitting down and making our calls. Most of us do not feel like doing open house on a weekend. Most of us don't feel like doing the things we're supposed to be doing. And the thing to get is, right, I don't like working out, but I like the feeling of having worked out. Right. Somerset Maugham, the writer, used to say, someone asked him once, do you like writing? He says, no, I like having written. Right. I don't like knocking on doors. I like having knocked. I don't like making calls. I like having made them. So that's really the mindset for whatever you're doing, whether you're knocking on doors or making your calls or doing your open house or however else you connect with people. You don't have to love it. You've got to love the feeling of having done it because you know it's the most important thing to help you succeed.
Absolutely. So to go deeper into where my question is and be more specific, when you are actually approaching a door, what are some of the things that you've learned over 125,000 doors that you've knocked that if someone's going to legitimately attempt this, you said one of them, don't do it for just 3 weeks or 3 months. This is a year commitment. What are some of the things that you do quite literally from your body disposition, from your cadence in your discussion? Do you have a script that you use? What are some of the things that you do when you're standing on that doorstep and the first doorbell has been rung or the door has been knocked? And what are you doing there as you're preparing yourself for that door to open?
I think the biggest thing is deciding what your framework is for how you operate. In other words, but when I decided I was going to knock on doors, then that's all I'm going to do. Right. And I have a certain time I do it. I time block it. Nothing interrupts it. I knock on doors from 11 to 2. Kyle, if you are referring me, so pretend we don't live in the same city, you're referring me a buyer that's coming into town, they want to go show property, they want to go look at property 11, can't do it. I'll show you at 2:30. By the way, in almost 17 years, every time I've broken my rule, every time, every time, every time, it was a waste of time. I did not need to blow my lead gen for some emergency. Never worked out. Never. People will, real stuff will wait for your time block. And I would just say that's the first thing to get that people don't get is there are no emergencies in real estate. You've got to set your schedule first. And if you don't get that right, you can't be in the right headspace often enough to be at the door because you're not present, because you're worried about everything else you could be, should be doing or didn't get to. So that's the first thing is having the right setup in terms of your environment and schedule. I talk about that a little in the book. And then the other piece of the mindset is there's lots, but I think something that will find people I think is underrated is to get myself in the mindset. I've got to be light, right? I can't be heavy. I can't be having just gotten off the phone in a difficult negotiation. I couldn't, just gotten in a fight with my kids or a spouse or something. I've got to be in the right mindset. So when I'm driving to the doors, I am listening to comedy. I'm listening to comedy. I am laughing. I have certain comedians I like to listen to. I've heard these bits 10, 12, 15 times. I don't care. I still laugh because then the moment I get out of the door, I'm light, I'm laughing, I'm having fun. And that energy comes with me to the doors. And it's already got me in the right mood. It's still, even when I'm going on a listing appointment or something that's I know is going to be difficult, I listen to comedy on the way. I'm not making calls. I'm not listening to a podcast. I'm listening to comedy because it puts me in the right mindset.
Those are two great professional tips. One, picking your time and sticking to that and committing to it like it's an appointment. Never have I had a client say to me that it was inappropriate for me to not answer their phone when I call back and say, I was in an appointment, I'm finished now, and I wanted to get right back to you. Very rarely. And honestly, if they do have an issue with that, there's an issue with them. And yep. We've all had a couple of nightmare clients where it's like they feel like you are in servitude to them, and being a servant is one thing. Being in servitude to someone else is very different. And I won't go any deeper than that. But picking that time, committing to it, I've never in my entire career and all the podcast interviews, I've never heard of that professional tip of listening to comedy, and it makes so much sense. It's a great way to just unwind. It's a great way to be loose and free. And I love that. Okay. So you're getting out of the car. What are you wearing? Do you wear a suit? Do you wear, slacks and a polo? What is your kind of professional demeanor where people know that you're serious, that you're professional, but you're still light and approachable?
Yeah, button-down shirt, usually pair of slacks. I've knocked on doors in 16 plus years, one time in jeans. That was it, one time.
Yeah.
And they were the jeans were more expensive than the slacks I typically wear, but that doesn't really matter. You got to look like a professional. You don't got to be in a suit and tie, but you can't be in shorts and a t-shirt. Yeah, you got to be professional and comfortable if you're knocking, but you got to be professional.
So then my audience, the Calibrate Real Estate podcast audience, knows that a lot of times we'll do a quick little role play live. And so if I might be as bold, because you've done this 125,000 times, you do you ring the doorbell or do you knock?
I do both.
You do both.
Often.
Good. And what's the trigger there for the doorbell and the knock?
What's hilarious is in California, you know what? In California, there's no basements in California, right? Because we have earthquakes.
Right.
And so when I got to Colorado, there's basements here, which I didn't even know what they were. And there's different kinds and blah, blah, blah. So if someone's working in their basement and you knock on the door, they often don't hear you.
Right.
That's the problem with just knocking. I don't like doorbells because they're impersonal, but after a while, I cannot tell you how many times people I used to knock up say, yeah, something just called me to come to the door. I didn't even hear you. Right. I was knocking.
Oh,
So it is a bit of a thing to, in all the years since I've done both, I've only had one lady yell at me, you knocked on the door and you rang the doorbell. What? She was screaming at me for something. I don't remember. I'm like, so sorry,
Yeah. Well, and she was probably just cranky anyways.
Yeah.
Or it could have been a guy too. So, All right. I open up the door and I say, hey, what's going on, man? What do you need?
Do you want to really role play or do you?
Sure. Let's do it.
Then there's no stopping in the middle. You just go all the way through.
Yep. Let's do it.
Right. Ring, ring, ring. All right. Hi, it's Stephen, the realtor. It looks like you're busy. Did I catch you at a bad time?
Yeah, no problem. I was just getting a workout in, and Stephen, nice to meet you. What can I do for you?
Well, great. Well, what I have will take less than a couple minutes. You probably don't have any real estate plans.
No, I mean, I live in this house, but I haven't been thinking. I'm not selling it.
Yeah, and you probably don't have any burning real estate questions.
I might actually, depending on how this goes. But yeah, what's on your mind? What did you come here for today?
Well, I come to the neighborhood a couple times a year and I drop off a market update just like this. Do you mind if I hand this to you?
Oh, sure. I'd love it. I love learning about the market. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, great. So it sounds like you're pretty active. You sort of keep an eye on things.
Yeah, I find that in our neighborhood, it's a real dynamic neighborhood. There's lots of things getting sold, both on and off the market. And I think it's smart to always be just sort of aware of what's going on. So yeah, I appreciate market data. That's always good for me.
Any particular market data?
I love to know when something has sold quickly. I always am really interested in why did that one sell real quick and then the other one was on the market for 3 or 4 weeks. That just is always something that's been very interesting to me.
So since it's something you study, you probably have an opinion on what's the difference.
Yeah, I think sometimes people are maybe priced incorrectly. And, I see it and kind of think that, gosh, they didn't price their home correctly. And that's why it sits around. Is that true though? I mean, is that the reason why houses don't sell?
I mean, I think you're pretty spot on, right? As someone who's paying attention, now that you're paying attention, maybe your spouse or maybe family member doesn't pay attention like you, but you kind of know they're never going to get that price, right? You are a realtor in this role play, but out of the role play or in the role play, right? You could be, you're paying attention like a realtor, right? You're interested, you're paying attention, and you can start to see the patterns.
Yeah. Well, and then what do you do to make sure that you price a house correctly if you're in real estate? Because I've always been interested in how someone really figures out how to be that person that goes under contract in the first weekend versus that person that's sitting on the market for a month or two and then they've got to drop their price. What's your strategy, Stephen?
So no one's ever said that to me at the door, and because you're a realtor, you're not thinking like a homeowner. You got to think like a homeowner to make
hey man, how much is my house worth?
Okay, well, that's a much better question. So It sounds like you have a number in mind.
Yeah, I kind of look out there on Zillow and Redfin and some of the other sites. Those are pretty accurate, right?
More often than not, if you take the three of them, that usually will give you the range most of the time.
And what are the three? I just said Redfin and Zillow. What's the third?
Oh, realtor.com.
Oh, okay.
Or most of them. I mean, I've often used Realtor, but pick your favorite real estate website. They're often, if you take three in a neighborhood like this, you're usually within shooting range.
All right, so time out.
Yeah.
The role play is over because obviously we're goofing with each other, and this is the fun thing about real estate professionals and testing each other out. You should do this, by the way, within your own offices, with a best friend of yours, with a whoever that like, and trust, and they can goof with you but help you stay on your toes, because practicing auditioning for people is really one of the things that I would say for you, Stephen, as well as myself, has led us to be successful in the industry. But when you're going through that discussion, I noticed it immediately. You're sharing with them sort of the keys to the castle, the keys to the kingdom. You're saying to them, take the three and average them out, and that's kind of going to be your range. And I would think some real estate agents would be like, don't tell them that. Like that's what we're for, right? So why would you provide them with that information? I think I know the answer.
I'm gonna disagree with you a little bit in that most agents want to give them the answer. Most agents want to say, great, give me your number and I'll set an appointment. I'll come over and give you a price. And that is just an absolute waste of time.
Got it.
First off, that they're just curious most of the time, right? They see things. Some people play golf. Some people look at real estate. They're both recreation.
Yep.
Some people just like to look at houses, right? I don't need to waste my time doing a comparable market analysis on someone who just likes to look at houses. So most of the time when someone's asking that, they're just curious. Most of the time. Now, depending on how the conversation goes, I might dig a little deeper, but I don't need to hide any information from them. First off, I've just given them a a detailed list of comparables. They can look to see where their house fits in. So that's another thing I would do sometimes if I'm in front of someone. But the answer is there's nothing to hide. My value isn't figuring out what the value of their house is in this discussion at their door. They don't even need me for that. And by the way, that's not why I get paid, So playing that cat and mouse is just a waste of time in my experience.
It's a great pro tip, because I was reminded of it as I was doing it. I stepped right into it. It's a great pro tip that whenever you're having a discussion with someone, whether in person or on the phone, you're not selling them anything. You're not closing the property today. You're creating steps towards a conversation. And one of the things I noticed that you did the entire time is you continued to ask me questions instead of provide answers. And you did it in such a way where you were just seeking to understand and learn more. It didn't feel like you were badgering me, badgering the witness. It felt like you were gently trying to extract information to make sure that you were going to provide the right information. And clearly you already came as a professional by saying, here's the information as it is already.
Yeah, absolutely. You just nailed all the nails on the head.
So I think that one of the things we've talked about internally before hopping on our podcast together is that a big area of focus for you, just a big themology for you, is patience and gratitude. Now, I would imagine 125,000 doors would give you a lot of patience. But the gratitude part of it to me was a little bit surprising, because I would imagine that most people go towards this is going to be a rough go at it to really make some traction happen. And so tell me more about patience and gratitude and how that's really served you as you've door knocked your way to success.
Well, the first part, patience, is, let's just be honest. I was pretty terrible at the doors for a long time. And I got business. What's the phrase? Even a blind squirrel finds a few nuts every now and then.
Yeah, almost in spite of yourself, you got hired.
Yeah, it's not that I was incompetent as a real estate agent. That was never the question, right? Because I came from a business background and whatnot. But in terms of prospecting at the door, was all just new and hard. It took me a long time to find my groove. And then, of course, moving markets for your, right after I began to find a groove, I moved markets, at the end of '08. So I started '09 in probably the worst market ever that I'll see. So part of it is, there's a lot of patience, building my business the first time, then starting over again. Right. If I had stayed in LA, I would have made way more money, way faster, because I was already established in a market. So having the patience to just stick it out and stick with it and have a commitment to getting better was one piece of it. And then, the gratitude is that I've lost track of time, but certainly a few years ago, I can't remember whether it was 2017 or 2016, it doesn't really matter. I had this realization that I should be somewhere that I'm not. But I've been doing it at that point 10 or 11 years. I should be somewhere else. If I'd stayed in LA, I would have made more money. Whatever other story. If I looked around and looked at other agents, why are they doing this and blah, blah, blah. And then I had read a different book on gratitude, and I had just got something. I got that I can be grateful for all that I have right now in this moment. And honestly, I have a lot, right? Because I got in this business to raise my kids. I didn't want to travel. I didn't want to commute. I didn't want to work nights and weekends. So really, I got into real estate so I could raise my kids. And I realized about 10, 11 years in, that's exactly what I got to do every day. I got to take my kids, take my son to baseball, I took my daughter to dance, I took both my boys to Hebrew school. I did everything. I got to do everything I wanted with them. I got to go skiing, we get to go hiking, we get everything. And when I look back, I was like, wait a minute, I have a lot. Right? It was right there in front of me. I didn't even realize that that's what I had. So having an appreciation for wherever I am and wherever I'm not is totally okay. And that may not translate here on this podcast for people, but and I go into it more in the book, but it really was the moment I got that everything's okay just the way it is, just the way it isn't, and a true appreciation that I didn't have to be somewhere where I wasn't. I had the freedom to just be, right? I was way more effective. I was way in a much better mood. I was I would almost say my life altered in those moments.
So I've got to imagine that on the amount of doors that you've knocked, you've got some pretty high level comedic stories of things that just comedy of errors just went wrong and just cratered, crashed and burned. But then also on the flip side of it, you've probably had some amazing blessings, some stories that never turned out the way you could have ever imagined. They turned out so much better. Real quick, just super high point, super low point, and just stuff that's just funny. What are some of the things that you've encountered?
I mean, hives of bees. If you've ever seen a beehive in transit, holy crap, it is frightening. So I've seen that and multiple snakes. By the way, I don't like bees or snakes, so both of those were terrifying. I've had people come to the door with their, hand on their gun, which is on their holster of their hip. That was here in Colorado, by the way. That never happened in California because, people don't do that in California. I had one guy come to the door in California in a towel. I'm like, dude, why the hell did you come? Like, seriously? Like, come on. Why would you open the door? I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot.
Those are all hilarious. Now, what are some of the things that you're like, I could have never imagined that one door would have led to 4 listings or whatever? Some of those pinch me moments were like, I'm so thankful that I got up today and did this, even though, I imagine that like anybody else, you probably have some of those mental discussions where you're like, should I really do this today? And all of a sudden it just turned out into something you'd never expect.
Yeah, I have way too many to count, and I have plenty of doors that one door turned into lots of business. So there's no doubt that that's happened, and there's no doubt that I have many doors. Those people have become integral parts of my life. I am not a hustler. I'm not a grind it out. I want to be number one kind of guy. I'm just not wired that way. And so for someone who's a go after type of person, what I'm talking about is probably not going to resonate much with you. And that's totally fine. But the one thing I am good at is I am good at demonstrating empathy and compassion and listening. And I've spent a lot of years working on those skills. And so I'm very good at that. Not perfect, but I'm good. And so therefore, the conversations I've had with people, how people have opened up, how people have thanked me for just, even though Yes, I've never sold their house, but they felt blessed that they got to know me and that I would spend any amount of time talking to them for a couple minutes and really listening. And honestly, that's pretty awesome, right? Because very few people in life that can say that. So yeah, that might not help you sell more homes sometimes, but in terms of looking back on a week and knowing you impacted someone's life just by prospecting is pretty remarkable. And therefore, my intentions at the door were never about just getting business. I have three intentions at the door. And the first one is to leave people better off than when I found them. Look, when you're knocking on someone's door, you are trespassing on their property and interrupting their day at the same time. So, having an intention, even if they don't want to talk, just say, smile and say, hey, have a great day. So, and then the second thing is, yeah, I am looking for now business, not future business, now business. I can't feed my family next year. I need to feed them tomorrow, today. And then the third thing is, how can I be of service? And really that third intention is really where I was just able, serving people sometimes is just giving them a couple minutes of your time. Did they all turn into business? Nope. But they all turned into something. And it makes it much easier to win, so to speak, at every door and every week when I do what I say I'm going to do, which is do my prospecting and then go out and be for other people. How many people can say that's what their day's about?
It's beautiful. And it helps me because I've done a lot of prospecting throughout my entire career. And I've had a couple of phone calls. These have been more recent, but this has happened over the course of my career, Stephen, where someone will call me about a deal they're working on with another agent in an area that I absolutely should be able to help them. And they'll ask me for advice. And that'll be almost a test for me to say, am I grateful that they're just even calling me, even though it may not lead to business? And I agree with you that we're obviously looking for today business, got to feed my family today. And that can sound cliche, that statement in and of itself. But when you're in the business of actually curating a marketplace and working through the prospect of here's who I'm going to help, and my family literally does not make money unless I have commissions, that is real for us as realtors. And so for a lot of people, especially W-2 income, that might sound cliche, like, got to make money for my family or bring home the bacon type of thing. But quite literally, if we don't get up and go to work, that literally means we're and that's a real tension for real estate agents, is that can go in overdrive and become inappropriate, and you don't have boundaries. But as I think about some of these situations where I will say at first, I'm like, what, why is this person calling me about a deal they're working on, not with me? That's just the natural first, why didn't they choose me? But then when I step back, I'm like, should I be thankful and happy that they wanted my advice and something that's a really important decision, whether I'm involved in it or not? And obviously I won't be compensated for it, but clearly I had demonstrated some level of value that they chose to call me specifically in that circumstance. And that's just a funny feeling. So I agree with you that when you knock on a door, you give someone your time, our most precious resource, even if it's not one of those monetary transactions that'll lead to a deal. It is really a very cool feeling if I'm in the appropriate headspace to think about it that way.
That's right. Yeah. And by the way, I'm not advocating that people go out and do free consulting. I'm not advocating that people go out and spend 3 hours at one door, right? That's not what I'm saying. It is an intention that we have or don't have in terms of how we serve and treat other people.
All right, Stephen Ross, we're nearing the end of this mountaintop experience. I'm so excited for you. Doors open when you knock. Before we get into our final three questions, I know Amazon's obviously the place that most people go to get the book. Any suggestions as to where people might be able to pick up the book?
Amazon's the easiest place to find it. You can go to my website as well. There's a link to the book, doorsopenwhenyouKnock.com. I do have social media handles, but my niece runs them because I don't do social media. So don't try and get a hold of me there.
Amazon, doorsopenwhenyouKnock.com. Those are the two best places to go look for it.
Yeah.
All right, Stephen Ross, last three questions I ask all of our guests. So our podcast and our brokerage is called Calibrate. A lot of real estate brokerages are names or nouns, and I chose a verb when I started our company almost 5 years ago. And the word calibrate is sometimes a misused word. Sometimes people call it recalibrate, or they'll use calibration. But the word calibrate is a verb that means to adjust using experimental results, taking external factors into account and comparing it with other data. Really, it's a word of iteration for me. And I like to talk to top performers, people who've been on the mountaintop multiple times, and just ask, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis to calibrate your life? How do you get unstuck? How do you kind of get back to center? What are some of those things that you do when you're feeling out of alignment to get back into alignment?
Wow, I could go a lot of places with that. And the short answer is that, there's this, I think I heard it first. Mike Singletary there was a 30 on, there was some special on ESPN at the very end. Mike Singletary, who was the Chicago Bears linebacker and brief stint as a head coach, looked in the mirror every day and said, how can I be better tomorrow than I was today? The line I often think about is Chris Voss, who wrote Never Split the Difference, former FBI hostage negotiator. We've done a lot of work with him. And he says, am I willing to be smarter today than I was yesterday? And I think that's the first thing that I think about. Can I not be attached to some other way I was doing it? Can I be open to learning? And then the other thing is, well, there's three things. That's first. Second, anything where I've broken my integrity or my word, right? I said I would do something and I haven't done it, going to get that cleaned up with either myself or somebody else. That's a much longer discussion. I'll just say that. And then the third thing is comedy, right? If I'm in a funk or some pity party and I just cannot get myself out of it, I will just put on, the other day I don't know what happened. I kind of do, but I don't know really why I was in a place. I'm like, put on some Dave Chappelle, man. I was, immediately just shifted where I was being. So I think those are my three answers for the one question you asked.
I love it. I love that it's a multi-point answer, because different routines, different tactics require different things to get you unstuck. And I think that that's what to calibrate is all about. Is we are on this improvement journey. And I love that you shared Mike Singletary. I'm going to lower my screen real quick to have people look at our logo. It is intentionally, even though this is not how life is, it is intentionally one step progression after another, as you kind of start from one and go to the next, and you're going all the way up. So I think that's the biggest goal that I think of, is how can I get better? How can I be a better version of myself? I love the reference to Chris Voss. I've heard him on a number of different podcasts about never split the difference or don't split the difference. That idea of how can I get smarter? I think most people think like, how can I try harder? How can I get better? How can I be smarter? I think it's such a great question to ask yourself. Awesome answer. Actually never heard it answered that way, which is really cool. After over 170 episodes, everybody sort of answers that calibration question differently. So I love that. All right, next question is one of my favorites. I've been asking it to hundreds of people over a variety of different podcast platforms. And I'm going to ask for you, I looked over my shoulder. I'm going to ask for you to go over your shoulder and actually hold your book in your hands, because I think that is important to do. Grab it, hold doors open when you knock. Now, and I want you to look at it, because I know obviously putting it up there for the audience to see, but accomplishing being an author is a huge deal. It's something that I've aspired to do and have not done yet. And I've talked to a lot of authors, and it's a huge life accomplishment. Now, what happens is when you're in a book line, and I know post-COVID, that's going to look different, but when you're interacting with someone in their 20s, you and I have been talking about, hey, we're kind of middle-aged white guys, but when, we were a little bit more hair, less gray, type of things like that, we had a lot of gumption, a lot of action, but maybe not a lot of experience. And so this next question is the advice you wish you knew when you were 22. So if you had the ability to take that book to your younger self, and maybe it is a letter to yourself in some form or fashion, what advice would you give to yourself, Stephen Ross, now that you've lived some life?
I think it's a great question. It's impossible to answer, right, when you stop and think about it, because part of who I am today is because of the mistakes it's the life I've lived. Yes, the book is, I wish what I knew when I started, right? It is what I learned, what I think what actually makes a difference, not the peripheral stuff, but the core things I needed to know and put in place to get my life and business working. So that's for sure. But I think the advice I would give my 22-year-old self is don't be, I'm gonna have to use a curse word. I'm so sorry, everyone. So if you don't like curse words, plug your ears. Don't be such an asshole. Like, geez Louise, man, I just didn't get it. It just took me a long time not to be a jerk, and not to be so righteous. You know, I just didn't get it. I thought that was the game. It just didn't, it just took me a long time to learn that. Still learning, by the way.
Well, and we're always evolving, right? But I find, and this is one of the tenets of wisdom that I've picked up along the way from others that are far older, far wiser, is that sort of this juxtaposition of the older you get, the less you know. And the more you realize that there are so many other masters in different professions and different ways of thinking than yourself. And I think that that is a act of humility for most people, where you say, I do know so much about my given craft or my profession, and yet I also realize that there's so much more for me to learn, and I'll never learn it all. And I think that that's such a wonderful way of looking at it. And that is the reason why we asked the Dear Younger Me question. It comes from a song that the author of the song is actually writing themselves and trying to figure out, do I give you advice because I know that that sort of broken road that I've been on here is what led me to my destination. So I know that's part of my journey. So it's kind of this conflict. So I think I love that you answered it that way. Final question is actually an iteration of that last question, Dear Younger Me. A very close personal friend of mine tragically passed away a couple of years ago. His name is Chris Oakley, and this is a tribute question to Chris. He was on episode 5 of our show, and he shared with me that when he was in his 20s, he had the blessing of being in a mentoring group. The mentoring group required him to read a book called The Principle of the Path by Andy Stanley. Andy Stanley asked his reader to write their own obituary. And Chris did that in his 20s, lived on mission until his late 30s when he tragically passed away in a hunting accident. And Chris just shared that that made him live on mission. He actually helped us at Calibrate Real Estate create our mission for our brokerage company. And so I like to just spin that just a little bit. An obituary feels like a newspaper columnist writing about you. But if you had a trusted family member or friend, Stephen, that was actually going to be sitting down writing what they would deliver in a eulogy at your funeral, and this is what you want to be known for and what you hope other people would know you for, what do you hope your legacy might be?
You know, it's a hard question for me to answer, because who doesn't want to be known as someone who made a difference for the people in their lives? I mean, when you talk about cliche, that's about as cliche as it gets. But in the end, is there anything else that really matters? Right? Is there anything else that matters than the people who know you or who've done business with you felt that you were there for them, that you were a contribution to them no matter what, that you were always putting their interests first? I can't think of a better thing to be known for. And it's not revolutionary, it's not new. I'm not the first person that said it, but I just can't think of anything else that would be more impactful.
Yeah, I think it also dovetails into your earlier answer, which is let's stop being a jerk. And you learn that over time, that it's becoming more others focused, others centered than it is self-centered. And I think in our 20s, using the Dear Younger Me example, it's very easy to think about, like, how do I get mine? How do I get experience? How does someone mentor me? And as you become older, as you live some life, as you raise kids, as you look at your spouse and you say, okay, this has got to be more than just about what we're able to accomplish here. So it's great advice. Stephen Ross, I'm so proud of you. Which it sounds funny, but I mean, that's it. I'm very proud of you that you've written this book, that you've poured your time and your information all into one source, which I know is going to bless a lot of people. So just as a reminder, doors open when you knock. Go out and get it on Amazon. Go out and check out Stephen on social media. His niece will direct message you on whatever platform that they're on. And I can't think of a more apropos way to end our show. We end our show the same way every single time, Stephen. But the topic of your book, Doors Open When You Knock, is absolutely perfect for what I'm about to say, which is we'll see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody.